Manx Radio Podcasts, powered by Shaw.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Hello and welcome to our weekly look back at Talking Heads. In the discussion this week, overhauls to the work permit system, efforts to repair, restore and reopen the Queen's Pier in Ramsey, and first of all, does government need a database to help select island jurors? With more, here's Stu.
Talking Heads, brought to you by Magic Carpets, with the only Carndine design showroom on the island.
Let's go to the lines. We've got Richard on from West Kirby, just over the water. Hello, Richard.
Oh, hello. Well, I hope you won't mind too much if I, sort of widen it out one way and narrow it down the other.
Okay.
But I think it's not only yourselves, but the UK in general, even the Western world, especially in the Anglo-Saxon part, have said, oh, lovely, lovely, it's like with a new toy. And they hadn't sort of done their homework and sort of put the sort of safety factors behind the scenes in place. And it's poor old Joe Public that's getting caught in the net with all sorts of things and scams and whatever down the line. And that's why I'm being rather careful. In fact, I've sort of being very sort of downplaying it indeed myself, until they, get their act together and proper security patterns put in place.
So if you were convinced then that proper security had been put in place, would you be happy to go on to some sort of a centralised database?
Well, I think a centralised database or online or any of the other sort of technical avenues, if they'd done their security homework previously, I'd be far more open to the possibilities of it than I am at the moment.
OK, fair comment. Thanks for calling, Richard. Nice to talk to somebody from across the water. If you've got a point of view on that one, do get in touch like Richard did. I'm not sure how I feel about this. I suppose I'm on the fence, really. Part of me says, well, if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to worry about, really. And thinking about it, I was just trying to list the number of people, and this is by no means extensive. I've got two different banks that I use. They've got all my details. Tax, national insurance people have got my details. Health services got my details. The cops have got my details. Not for any nefarious reason, I hasten to add, but when our shop was burgled last week, the copper said, all right, give me your details and I'll check it against our record. So they've obviously got some details as well. There are probably dozens and dozens of different organisations that have got my details. Now, would I be happier if there was a centralised database? I don't know if I'd be happier or less happy, to be honest, but I can't really see any problem with it, except if it's not secure. And that's the big worry about these things, if it's not secure. And like I said earlier on, the worry that I have about all this is that I check my email when I get home every afternoon, and usually I've got, 10, 15, 20 emails. Usually one or two of them are real and the others are spam. And it just seems that we never read in the papers or hear on the news about these spamming masterminds who are just infecting the entire internet with the rubbish, being held to account. And I'd like to see some high-level prosecutions. People doing that, people like the Tesco bank thing last week. I'd like to see some people going to jail for that, to give us a bit more confidence in the system. The worry is that we're all aware of all this stuff that's going on, but we never seem to see any prosecutions.
Manx Radio, the Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Question this part of the programme: does government need a central database of island residents to help choose jurors? Could be used for all sorts of other things as well. And civil rights campaigners are suggesting it's the thin end of the wedge. Albert is our first contributor by email today. He says, Stu, a centralised database of island residents is the thin end of the wedge indeed. This idea is typical, and I'd suggest central to Mr. Robert Shaw's often bizarre visions of how a country should be run. They may work for running a hotel, but to impose them on all members of society is ridiculous. We must also remember that Chris Robert Shaw has the lowest mandate in the House of Keys with 478 votes, 487 votes from the public at the general election, a drop of quite a few hundred from last time. Well, that's nothing to do with anything, really, is it? He is an MHK and therefore has been elected democratically. I hope that his colleagues in the House of Keys will stay aware of this, says Albert from Douglas East. Okie dokie. The island's justice system really in such a state that we need this sledgehammer to break a nut? We have far bigger issues in government to solve than this perceived urgent problem thought up by Mr. Robert Shaw, says Alan. What's this? On account of our system being totally corrupt and the individuals running it creating a closed shop. Oh, here we go. Conspiracy theory number 16. Yes, well, we'll leave that one there. The whole point about these databases is that they've got to be above reproach, haven't they? They've got to be secure, and they've got to be only accessible to people who genuinely need access to them. There are all sorts of checks and balances that need to be in place. Now, whether or not they've always been in place, I don't know. But I don't know that I worry too much about it. Hi, Stu, bring it on. ID cards, chip implants. I don't care if Big Brother knows that I'm in the wood or the prospect I'm in a pint. If you have nothing to hide, why care? In these times of terrorism, some human rights should be out the window. The government should know who is here, says Rob. Well, that's an interesting thought as well, I suppose, isn't it? I think that Tristram Llewellyn-Jones said something about the children's database in the UK being used for other purposes, including knowing the immigration status of the families involved. Well, maybe that's not a bad thing. I don't know. Let's have a look. Just come in, so I haven't heard it all, but they're saying don't put all your eggs in one basket comes to mind. If your details are spread over an area, any genuine person will not be perturbed about looking. If it's all together, one wrong hit will expose you to all sorts of mischief, says Howard. OK, back to the lines. We've got Terry on. Hello, Terry.
Oh, good afternoon. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. What's your thought on this? Would you be worried about being on a Big Brother database?
We're already on it. Have you not read in the papers and seen on the TV about all these companies selling databases, insurance companies selling databases, even police databases? How many discs have been found in skips?
Yes.
How many things have been left on trains with,
True.
Absolutely unbelievable. All you're doing is giving another job's worth or two or three of them more things. I mean, the guy, your last fellow on the email, that type of thing. Nobody's realised, a lot of people don't realise that the MHKs don't run the Isle of Man. It's the civil servants, the senior civil servants who run the Isle of Man. They only give the information to what they want the MHKs to know.
Do you think?
And then when they run down the trench and they get the sack, ask John Shimmin. This just happens, It just happens, I'm afraid.
It's a point of view, Terry.
These 12 people are good people that have just gone in, but they've already been got. But as they're going through the door, oh, how wonderful to meet you, and blah, blah, blah. That's why there's so many government departments need disbanding.
All right, and on that conspiracy theory, we'll leave that. Thank you, Terry, for your thoughts. Interesting, but I'm not sure. If you've got a point of view about this, I think that if they could make it secure, a centralised database would make perfect sense. It seems crazy that every institution, every organisation that you deal with, you become a part of their database, credit cards, banks, the whole thing. So maybe a centralised one would be a good thing. It's who is allowed access to it, I suppose, that is the question, and whether or not it's secure is my point of view. Talking about a centralised database with all our details on it so that juries can be selected from that rather than the electoral roll. What do we think about it? Stu, I was once given the job of setting up a highly secure database. The solution was a standalone computer locked in a secure cupboard inside a secure room. The only connection to the outside world was a 3-pin power plug. And there's no reason to connect to the internet. That from Paul in Maccled. Yes, I suspect that you're right. And so the only trouble is that the internet is just so usable, isn't it? And so convenient as a way of getting information instantly. Your way of doing it would mean that there would have to be sort of skilled and security-checked operators there who maintained this very secure database and only allowed information out in packets, if you like, that were relevant to any particular inquiry, rather than everybody who's on the system having access to everything on it via the internet. But yeah, maybe that's the way to do it. I don't know. Why don't we, as the Chinese, Russians or North Korean governments, they seem to know how to run their databases. I'm pretty sure that they're secure, says Josh. I've got no idea, don't know. I think a citizen database would be intrusive and ineffective. The more information that is in one place, the more difficult it is to manage the data for the individual. Chances are that some pieces of information will not be accurate because even in the most stable life, things change, true. Also, we all have things that we don't want the whole world to know. When we're applying for a driving licence, is it necessary for our file to show that we've seen the doctor for an annoying skin condition? Worse things than annoying skin conditions, but I know what you mean. Government already has the means to create a database with the census details. Yes, I suppose they have. Not thought about it like that. Databases aren't safe. We have 2 ex-directory phone numbers, and the only people who we thought knew them was family members, Manx Telecom and the government. But we now know this is not the case. Our information has been sold on to junk mail companies who never stop calling us. One even told us that they got our information from our telecom provider. You need to get onto the telephone preference service to stop that from happening then. What's that? Oh, that's a song request. We don't do song requests. Do you really think it's a conspiracy theory that civil servants run the island, Stu? I thought it was pretty obvious to most people. The key is to get people into government who are less gullible and will get a grip on them. That from Paul. Stu, the White House thought that they were safe and secure. Just ask Hillary Clinton, says Howard. I didn't follow it with any great interest the last 6 months of the American presidential election, to be honest. But I thought it was a case that she was sending secure stuff over insecure means, using a private email account to send privileged data. I thought that was the fallout there. You do not have to have a database. If you pay tax, you can do jury and vote. Yeah, but an awful lot of people aren't on the electoral register, are they? Because they don't want to do jury duty, and that's part of the problem, I think. Telephone preference service here doesn't work. I and many others have submitted the request to Telecom, but at the start of the new month, the junk calls start again. Text calls to Manx Radio are handled by a premium call junk mail provider in Newcastle. How many of your listeners knew this? I don't think you'd call them a junk mail provider. I know that we've got some sort of a service, but I think it comes through Manx Telecom. Who they use, I really don't know. With something this, we're sure government don't know how many people live here. Not everyone fills in the census. That's true. There's a large itinerant population here. People come and go. Well, is that part of the reason that we ought to have some sort of a centralised database, and that people then wouldn't be able to access? I mean, according to this, people wouldn't be able to access government services if you're not on the database. So that would ensure, surely, that people made sure that they were on the database, because otherwise they couldn't do anything effectively. Would that give us a better idea about who's here? And is that a concern to people? Bob's been on. He says it depends on which or what information is retained and how secure it is. Very good points, Bob. And Mike sent me a text. As soon as the government takes responsibility for the data and covers any losses when they get hacked, they can put me on the database. Well, yeah, I mean, the thing is that people get very upset, of course, when these databases go missing or when they're compromised. But apart from people having the information about you that might be available, by somebody just looking in a phone directory, is there any actual loss, consequential loss, I suppose, of your information being out there on the ether? I don't know. So quite how you could quantify the loss of your data, I'm not sure.
Stu Peters, the Nation Station, Manx Radio.
This is Talking Heads on Manx Radio. Welcome back to our happy and positive little show, and thank you very much for sharing a part of your afternoon with us today. I hope you enjoy your stay. Good progress is being made apparently in the efforts to repair, restore and reopen Queen's Pier in Ramsey, according to the head of the trust behind the plan. After a quiet few months with regard to news about the pier, Project Supremo Tom Durrant gave John Moss this update on Mandate this morning.
The survey that we had to do on the pier of 60 bays has been completed before the bad weather. We had insurance on the pier only till December, and so it's been done on time. The report to the government on the damage and cost to repair and the health and safety by December on the 60 bays has got to be forthcoming. We are now a Manx charitable trust. We are community-driven. Ramsey events, driven team and donations raised 14k when we started in May, and which is pretty good. This will allow us to promote large fundraising efforts this winter after the lease has been signed with the government. We understand the cost of the pier replacement starting in the good weather in 2017 on day one. We need insurance cover, and it's going to cost to repair the 3 days £100,000, and we have an understanding about galvanising the steel, and the supplier that's on the island is going to help us do that. So that 100,000 covers both the steel and the replacement timber.
The government have been looking after the pier. Presumably that money they've used to going to looking after the pier, part of that can now be used for your cause, can it not?
No, they don't. The government is not involved. The government provides us with no money whatsoever. They haven't done for the past 20 years, and that's why it's in such a bad condition. And that is why, we just, although we're giving these reports to the government, we're not expecting them to give us any money. But we are self-contained. We're not relying on the government anymore. The Friends of Queen's Pier have an AGM coming up in December to vote to join us. This is very generous, and we are very pleased to have them do that. We understand the mechanics of replacement and the detailed sequence that we have to create, and is going to be presented to the trustees to examine that soon. It is a community project, and I have people stop me in the street and give me money, and I try and find out their name and try and send them a thank you letter. They said, wave their hand. They said, it doesn't matter, just get on with it. And we are.
Just as a matter of curiosity, at the end of that exercise, whose pier will it be?
Well, if we take out a 99-year lease, I don't think the government will have very much more to do with it. There's nothing like self-reliance in trying to create money to employ people to look after the pier forever. And that's what we're planning to do. We're not relying on the government one bit.
Probably not a bad plan, that either. That was Tom Durrant talking to John Moss on Mandate this morning. Given the seeming success of this model of funding so far for the Queen's Pier project, is it something that the island should be looking at more, do you think? Could the loss-making heritage railway networks be better served by being run by enthusiasts and volunteers, removing the burden from the public purse, for example? Do we have sufficient numbers of people here for things like that? And are we now at a point where people need to be more prepared to protect the facilities and attractions they really value, rather than expecting government to do anything about it at all? Let's go to the lines. We've got Wilf on from Ramsey. Hello, Wilf.
Hiya. I'm delighted with Tom Durrant and everything he does and everything he's done in the past.
Yes.
He's done the right thing by keeping the government out of it. Well, actually, they want to be kept out of it, because they've never, ever wanted to fix the pier. No. Ever. Because I've fought for the pier for years and years.
Well, I mean, you're a lot closer to it physically and emotionally as well. But I was under the impression that government had voted some money to at least maintain it in a state of dereliction. But from what Tom Durrant said earlier on in that interview...
That's the right way of putting it.
Yeah.
That's the right way of putting it.
Yeah, but I mean, Tom Durrant said that nothing's been done for 20 years. So where's the money gone?
All the damage that's been done on the pier, the government have done it. It's all been done with the government. Anyway, forget that.
Okay.
Because it was going to be very short. Now, what it is that anything to do with heritage, doesn't matter what it is, should be kept. Because the whole island is squawking for visitors. Visitors do not come to a place to look at things from the same thing as where they've come from. They come to look at something different and something old. And the Isle of Man is hell-bent on getting rid of everything. Well, it's as simple as that.
Well, I don't know if everybody does want old things, and I'm not saying you're wrong necessarily, Will.
No, I'm talking about the old people here.
No, but I mean, people come in
by having this.
People coming to visit the Isle of Man, I don't know if they want old or if they just want different. I would suspect that it's probably they just want different.
To the Isle of Man, let's take it an easy way. Anybody that comes to the Isle of Man and looks at it and says, "Oh, what a lovely place! I'd like to live here." They're genuine. People that used to come every year for the races, and then they say, "When I retire, I'm going to come here to live. I love it here."
Yeah.
But they don't. They like it. as when they remember it, not change it to something like where they're trying to get away from.
I still
and that's
think
what we're doing.
I still think that my Gravity Pursuit Centre at Snaefell would bring them in crowds, and that'd be new. That wouldn't be old.
Definitely.
Yeah, good man.
Anything at all. Yeah, that's not old, but Snaefell is old.
Oh, yes,
As long as they don't destroy it, that's fine.
All right. All right, well, always good to hear from you. Thanks for getting in touch today. David H. says, I'm sure that the Queen's Pier will be a big success, providing that the government don't interfere. Good. When there was an opening of the Queen's Pier earlier this year, someone came up with the idea of sponsoring a piece of wood for the relaying of the boardwalk of the pier. I do believe in the UK some Friends of Piers groups have been successful in this way of preserving piers. That from Kev. It's the old thing, though, isn't it, Kev, that in the UK, if you've got a pier at Bridlington or wherever it might be, you've got a potential catchment area of millions of people who might visit that, whereas in the Isle of Man you just really don't. So there'd be nothing more sad than seeing a few planks with names on and the rest of them plain, because there just weren't the number of people to do it. But anything that works has got to be a good idea. There are no bad ideas as far as this is concerned. So anything that brings money in for what Tom Durrant and his team are trying to do has got to be a good thing, hasn't it? We're talking about Queen's Pier in Ramsey, and I think we've got Rob on from Pier. Hello, Rob.
Oh, Stu, it's sunny in Pier. What's it like in Douglas?
It's not bad, actually. Yeah, it's quite sunny looking out over the bay, yeah.
Ramsey Pier, I think that's a good idea. We should try to preserve what we've got.
Yes.
And the horse trams, because they're unique, the horse trams. And we should keep those running as long as we can. And that's also important.
Well, yeah, I mean, my thought on this, Rob, and I'm not disagreeing, I would never disagree with you, Rob, but, I mean, people say heritage, vitally important and all that. We don't want to live in a museum necessarily, do we? And these things are important, but if they're not being used by people, and I get the impression that the horse trams aren't terribly well used, and I've always worried about what the pier might be used for, if anything, if it is refurbished at great cost.
Yeah, I hope they've got a few bright new ideas for us. But the likes of the Castle Ruskin, they brought that up to a medieval look about it.
Yeah.
And Russian Abbey, they brought that up as well. So they've done the right things in the right places before, so we need to preserve as much as we can.
All right, fair dues. Thanks for calling, Rob. And somebody else has been on. I couldn't agree with Wilf more. Visitors love our heritage and all we do is destroy it more and more. Well, I can see the point of heritage. I'm not completely without sympathy for things like that. I just think that there used to be it probably still is, a bit of a wag that posted on Manx forums that said, what the Isle of Man needs is a monorail and a felt museum. I don't know about a felt museum, but a monorail, I mean, just imagine that rather than horse trams. How about something real 21st century that goes out over the bay, maybe? Starts off at the sea terminal, goes right across the water at high tide to the War Memorial, and then right across the water again down as far as the Summerland end. That's the sort of thing that might actually make people come here to go on something like that. Just a thought. But do we always have to rely on the old stuff, or are there not new ideas that we could come up with that would do the same job? But the Queen's Pier, fantastic that something is finally being done about it after years and years of neglect and years of politicians umming and ahhing about it, but not really doing much. Got Stuart on. Hello, Stuart.
Oh, hello there, Stu. Yeah. It's nice to speak to you and nice to hear about the work on the Queen's Pier.
Yes.
I'm one of the trustees and supporting Tom. I heard his talk this morning to
John Moss
on Mandate, and it's quite right that he brings to the attention the fact that since 1993, when the government first voted up to 40 grand a year for the maintenance of the pier, that in fact very little of that money has been spent, which has resulted in the rather dereliction of what we're faced with now. But
well, that's very disappointing, because I know that they didn't want to spend a lot of money on refurbing it, but I thought that they were sort of maintaining it at a certain level, and it seems that that's not been the case.
No, I don't think it has been. But of course, you must remember that they voted and spent 1.8 million on the stabilisation process, which at least stopped bits falling off and clouds of people walking underneath the pier, which was good news. They took all the stanchions and the lampposts, etc., way up to Jerby, where they're stored, and hopefully we can get some of them back when we get down to it. But my point is that, of course, this is in the past. They haven't done the maintenance, but really I'm more looking forward, and I was listening to the Chief Minister in Tynwald making his statement on the programme, and he emphasised the fact that we're looking to have inclusion and working together, and this is really what I would like to see. Okay, they didn't spend the money in the past. I accept in the straitened financial circumstances that we're in that the government can't put in capital costs, but they can certainly help us in cooperation with the trustees here, because they can supply some of the larch that they've had to cut down around the island. We can use quite a lot of that. They can help with the DOI. I've got specialist people in there, specialist engineers. I've got blacksmiths, etc. All of this can be of help to us, even though they can't perhaps put in capital costs.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, practical help like that would be invaluable, wouldn't it, really?
Yes, indeed. And I think I heard somebody mention the fact about sponsoring of deck planks. And indeed, we are hoping that can be brought about, and I've had quite a number of people wanting to purchase them already, and of course we can't have that happen until we get the lease signed, and that's indeed is the next step. We've got to persuade government and DOI and whoever that they should sign a lease for us for the first 3 bays, so that we can demonstrate that we can do what we say we're doing.
Absolutely. All right. Well, more power to your elbow, and let's hope that there's a good outcome this time. Thanks for calling, Stuart.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
We're talking about work permits, though, and whether or not think that it's time to maybe revisit the whole work permit situation in the Isle of Man. Let's go to the lines. We've got Dave on, our Ballasalla correspondent. Hello, Dave.
Hi, Stuart.
Your thoughts on this?
Well, Stuart, I was a subject, if you want, of the work permit when I first came to the island. In them days, it was 10 years. But I personally don't think that they should relax the work permits, purely and simply because I think once you relax the work permits, you're going to open the floodgates then for people to come in, and you're really not going to have any control over who comes in. I think the skilled shortage problem dates back to possibly the late 70s, early 80s, when the government of the day decided that they weren't going to fund people going to the college on day release and for apprenticeships and one thing and another.
Yeah.
So a lot of the companies that relied on young fellows coming in, taking up apprenticeships and one thing and another, just didn't take them on.
Right.
So with that in mind, you had the problem then of, well, okay, they weren't taking apprentices, so your skill base really, the bottom dropped out of it.
Well, all right. I mean, in terms of skills, that's one thing, because there are certain skill shortages. But it's a lot more widespread than that, as we heard in the interviews. The fact is that even
in as much as they say there's 800 jobs at the job centre. Now nobody is denying that. I can't deny that because I've not been down there. But what I will say is, a lot of those jobs, I would say a majority of those jobs, are going to be paying wages, salaries that married people can just not live on.
Well, that's a whole big debate, though, isn't it? I mean, the fact of the matter is that if you're out of work and you need work, surely it's better to take what you can get rather than staying on benefits in the hope that somebody's going to pay you a lot more money, isn't it?
Right. Let's take it a step further. Supposing that you're on £15,000 a year,
yeah,
and you become unemployed, and the jobs down at the job centre are offering £10,000 a year,
yes,
£12,000 a year. Is it right that you go to that level when you know in your own mind that maybe you have a mortgage, maybe, you've got...
Well, I mean, if there are no jobs at 15 grand that I'm successful in getting, I need to ask myself, A, why that is, and B, whether or not I need to rethink the whole deal. And if, you're used to an income of 15 grand, if that's what you need, and you can't get a job at that level, then surely there is some help from social services or whoever to sort of to top up your salary to make sure that you can pay the mortgage. I mean, I'm not an expert in that, but that's the way that I assumed it worked.
That's not the way it works, you see. If you've got a mortgage, the mortgage is your responsibility. Now, again, you've got to look from the other side. If you're allowing people to come into the island without any control whatsoever, you're going to need more houses, you're going to need more services, more infrastructure, and the whole thing is just, it's a massive, massive debate that needs to take place. And
it is.
Quite honestly, I don't think that there's anybody in government, the present government or the past government or the one before that, if you want, who is going to be able to sit down and say, well, yeah, we need to do this, we need to do that. It's all right. The Chamber of Trade and Commerce shouting, we need people to come in to support the economy. Yes, that's right. You do need that. But at the end of the day, you also need people who are earning a level of remuneration, salary, or whatever you want to call it, to pay, because the cost of living here is at least 10% higher than it is in the UK.
All right, fair comment, Dave. Some interesting comments there. I don't know that I agree with you, to be honest, but some interesting comments. Other people might agree or disagree with that. What do you think? We need to move on because I can see that we've got some more comments in. Stu, we need Mr. Peake to come forward with the conditions that will need to be applied with regard to earning levels and family dependence to ensure that new people coming to the island are net contributors to the government finances, bearing in mind our low taxation regime for government income but high social service provider for government expenditure. The previous island growth has not addressed this, says David. Okie dokie. As normal, a load of hot air coming out of Tynwald. The government wants to give freedom to flourish. How can local companies expand, keeping the Manx pound on the island when the government are bringing in UK companies to the island to carry out work a local company can do, if not better? We could employ an apprentice and train him to do this work. Ridiculous, says Rob. Well, I mean, I don't know whether you're right or wrong, Rob, but I can't imagine anybody in government giving work to an off-island company if a local firm can do the job as well or better, is what you say. Politically, it doesn't make any sense at all for the government to bring in off-island workers if local people are available to do that job. Just doesn't, I can't imagine why they would want to do that for a second. Might be wrong, but I often am. The facts are that work permits hold the Isle of Man back. The high price of housing also holds the Isle of Man back as people in lower paid sectors can't live. The Isle of Man government always wanted their cake and eat it where permits are concerned. We need more taxpayers of working age, not retirees. This place needs bringing back to life. That's a thought as well.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
This is Talking Heads, and we're talking about the work permit system. Is it time for it to be relaxed or removed altogether? What do you think about that? Let's go to the lines. We've got Anthony on. Hello, Anthony.
Hi, Stu. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thanks. What's your point of view on this?
My concern is that there generally seems to be a train of thought that says if you're prepared to invest a load of money into the island for whatever reason, that you can basically employ who you like, and the work permit rules are sort of brushed under the carpet a wee bit.
Okay. All right. I mean, I've not picked up on that. I think that people are suggesting that the system isn't working the way it is, and it's not just employers or companies, it's the government and the Chamber of Commerce seem to agree with that now.
Well, I think there's a concern that if the work permit system were to be got rid of, it would open the floodgates. I mean, I came to the island 25 years ago on a work permit, and somebody actually complained that my permit was issued when the process hadn't been followed properly, and it had, because I ensured that before I resigned my position across.
Yes.
And it was investigated, and it was proven that my employer had done the job properly. Now, I recently applied for a job that was advertised in the local paper, and was interviewed, and within a few minutes it was very apparent that clearly they had no intentions of employing me or even considering me for it, and that they'd got somebody in mind across already for the job, and they were going through the motions.
But why would they want to bring somebody from across if there was somebody here that could do the job?
You tell me. That's the question. Clearly, if they've got somebody that's already working for them, they're a known quantity to them, they know how their systems work and all the rest of it, they would argue that the training requirement maybe is less. But at the end of the day, I mean, if you read my CV and read the job adverts, the way the thing was written, you may have suggested they were written by the same people.
Right. Okay.
It couldn't have been better placed. And some of the skills were quite specific. They weren't just everyday skills. They were things that are born over a long period of time. And I've accepted the fact that job isn't for me, but at the end of the day, I wouldn't like other people to have to go through the same experience,
Sure. Okay. All right. I understand that. So I'm still at a loss why anybody would employ somebody from the UK or even further afield if there was a local candidate for the job, because you've got to transplant somebody into the island. They've got to find housing and all the rest of it. Find schools for the children if needs be, and it's a big upheaval, even for the company that is the employer in the situation. Now, if the guy that got the job is better qualified for it, maybe younger, I don't know. I know we're not supposed to be ageist these days, but...
well, that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, this guy could be 25 and I'm 48, so it could be making a difference.
Yes.
But at the end of the day...
it could be the chairman's grandson or somebody. I mean, there are all sorts of reasons, I suppose.
So why not be upfront about it?
Yes. Yeah, that makes sense. It's just that employment law is so convoluted these days that I think sometimes people have to go through the motions, don't they? But I take your point, and I'm not disagreeing with you. It's and I'm sad that you didn't get it, especially if it was, like you say, if it was almost written for you. But it
got to the point where you can be belligerent about it and say I wouldn't take it now even if it was offered, but a lot of people can't afford that.
No, of course not.
It was a reasonably highly skilled job, and if the salary estimates or anything to go by, reasonably highly paid as well. So you'd expect people here to be saying, yeah, that's for me, I'm going for it. But yet still, without them saying it, it was very, very obvious that they had somebody in mind for it that was already employed by them somewhere else.
I see. Right, yeah, okay. Well, I mean, we've heard of things like that happening. All right, Anthony, thank you very much for your call. An interesting take on the situation. Let's move on, go to line 2. We've got John on. Hello, John.
Hi, Stu. My opinion is the work permit system on this island is a complete farce.
Right, okay.
Government departments are the worst offenders. Now, I'll give you an example. One of my sons worked for a government department. Promotion opportunity came up. He was passed over for somebody. 4 times this happened. He was told not to apply because he didn't have the qualification. When the people that came from the mainland came, he found out they didn't have the qualifications, And on top of that, he found out the qualification wasn't necessary. Now, this happened 4 times. 4 times people came from the mainland, got work permits. They didn't last. Some lasted 12 months, some lasted 2 years. In the end, he got fed up, walked out, and went to another government department.
So you think that the work permit system just doesn't work properly? It's not that you're against it in principle, you just don't think it works?
Well, it doesn't work. It works for the government because they can manipulate it. Yeah. But my argument is this. When a person comes over here and they get a work permit, their wife comes with them, so they automatically get a work permit. But it goes further than that, and I've asked this question, and I cannot get an answer. If they've got, say, 2 teenage children leaving school, do they then get work permits? You try and get an answer to that question, because I can't.
I presume that the answer is yes, but I don't know.
There would be 4 work permits.
Yeah.
But it's a total farce, and now it's not. I'm not only talking about my son. I've heard this from other people too. I heard a lady I was talking to not long ago, and she said her husband was told exactly the same thing. Don't bother applying because we've got somebody from the mainland penciled in.
Okay.
And, it's just ridiculous. And in between these people coming, for instance, my son was doing the job, and he could do it with one hand tied behind his back, but he was still passed over.
Again, John, I can't see why any employer would want to employ somebody from the UK if there was somebody locally that could do it.
The top of the pile is from across, and they've got, probably been here long enough not to need a work permit, but they've got mates.
Oh, I see.
They bring their mates in.
Ah, right, OK, that's something that I'd not thought of, but yeah, all right, fair dues. I wonder if that does happen. That's John's point of view on it. We'd like to hear yours. Another text, a lot of employers on the island are only offering part-time work at minimum rate with 0 contract. Who can live on that? Foreigners, that's who. Yes, because obviously foreigners don't need as much money to live on as residents do. Do you need a work permit to serve coffee? I don't think so. Actually, you do. It's a disgrace. Right, OK, not quite sure why it's a disgrace, but yes, you do need a work permit to serve coffee if you're not a Manx worker. Hey boy, there's a big difference between stopping economic growth and firms employing and exploiting cheap, unskilled Eastern European labour. Well, again, we've got minimum wage legislation, so, all this talk about, people come over and work for peanuts isn't true. Best example is the government's favoured bill dears employing non-time served tradesmen on minimum wage, not paying national insurance or income tax, working on government contracts. Maybe that's down to conflicts of interest or members' declared interests. Just look at page 3 of the Examiner, says Frank. Okie dokie, let's go back to the lines. Hello? Andrew?
Hello?
Yes?
Hi, Stuart. Yes, I was just listening to your previous caller about the family work permit. My wife and I both came over on work permit positions that we were given work permits. When our daughter joined us, she had to apply. She didn't automatically get a work permit just because she was our daughter.
Oh, I see. All right. I mean, I'm presuming that she arrived later than you did she? She arrived separately?
Yeah, but only by a couple of months.
Right. Okay.
So she's not granted a work permit.
All right, fair dues. Thanks for clarifying that. Good. Before we alter the work permit system, says this one, we should address the amount of Manx workers who are unemployed, some of whom have never worked. I know some people who have no intention of working either. I can't understand how or why we need to employ people in the catering industry without permits when the unemployed should be forced to work in these jobs. That's from Carol in Peel. Well, yes, but it's a bit like talking about conscription. The army would say we don't actually want people who are forced to do the job, and a lot of employers would feel the same. You don't really want to employ somebody to work in your coffee shop or your restaurant or your cafe or whatever if they're going to be throwing food and drinks and things at the customers because they don't want to be there. But I agree with the basic tenet of what you're saying. We want them to open the floodgates, but permits are just one factor in this. The other is high cost of housing, insecurity associated with this. People can't settle here and leave. Well, also training. Isle of Man is seriously limited, and your previous caller mentioned marrieds. What about those renting in the private rent sector? I don't know what that's got to do with it, to be honest. These people are nothing more than a right-wing self-interest group. Which people? Britain left the EU, and one of the main reasons was cheap immigrant labour. That will happen here. Cheap labour to drive down the local wages. Somebody called these people the Chamber of Con Men. How right they are. says Steve. Oh, okay, so that's the right-wing interest group, the Chamber of Commerce. I think that they would generally disagree with that. We want to speak for those stuck in private rented, paying hundreds in rent, low-paid jobs where they're better off on the dole or worse off working. Again, that's a bigger issue, I suppose. Sorry, but you're wrong. Oh, okay. Estate services bring a company over every 6 months to carry out for them. It all goes wrong when the government ask architects to include a piece of equipment in a project. They go on the internet, search the item, pick the first manufacturer that's listed instead of inquiring locally. Well, that's a point of view. I don't know if you're right or wrong. If you're right, then that's a little bit scary. I suggest that maybe you're not. There was mention of staff shortages in retail and hospitality. Very often these positions are filled by foreign nationals, yet in the last week or so there have been 2 court cases and the defendants, foreign, have been described as unemployed. I encourage more to come here when these no doubt others are out of work, says Charles. Why don't the companies who claim that they can't get staff start up a trainee programme? I'm also sure that the people who've done the work on Pier Road weren't on island workers, says Jan. Well, trainee programmes are kind of all right, but a lot of smaller businesses, and remember, it's small businesses that keep the island afloat just as much as the huge multinationals. You often can't afford to have people who aren't 100% productive. And a trainee isn't that. I applied for a job, had an interview for a job in a well-known local company. 7 weeks later, I've still not heard back. However, a friend of a family told me that somebody from the UK got the job because they had a qualification that they don't do on the island, says Jane. Okay. I work for a company who denied a Manx person a van driver's job for a person needing a work permit. It's easy to get a work permit. The employer just tells the government department that they have no one local. Well, if that's the truth, then that makes sense, doesn't it? If no Manx worker applies for a job, then it's not unreasonable to expect that you should be allowed to give it to somebody else. But you've got to. I mean, I've been through this with my shop, and you've got to be able to prove who's applied for a job and who's not. So it's not that simple to just say, oh, nobody applied, because somebody could pop up out of the woodwork and say, well, actually, I applied for that job, and then it all ends up in court and it goes horrible. It happened to me a few years ago, qualified for the job but passed over for a mate of my potential boss from the UK. Well, yeah, I mean, that's not fair, but it happens, and I suppose we can understand that it would happen. If you were in a position of employing somebody and you've got a choice between somebody that you know and hopefully like, or somebody that is a complete stranger, it is surely natural that you would go for the person that you know. Not saying it's right, but surely it's human nature, isn't it? Government policy seems to be to employ from across now, massages the figures for incomers versus people leaving the island. Okay, I'd not thought about it like that. I mean, surely it'd be better if you're going to massage the figures to make sure that there are fewer people getting benefits and being unemployed. The answer to your question about the incoming civil servants who are now running this government, keeping jobs for their mates, is well known by the many locals who are never given the opportunity for promotion to the top-paying jobs, says Ali. Okay, but, I mean, isn't part of this, and I'm playing devil's advocate now, Ali, isn't this partly just sour grapes from people who've maybe got as high as they're ever going to get in the pecking order of things, and then use this as an excuse, oh, well, of course, it's because we're not from across or whatever, and because they're going to get the mates in or whatever. Still employing people from across brings more taxpayers to the island, says Ian. Okay, well, that makes sense. A couple of years ago I applied for a minimum wage driving job. I know this island inside out, clean full licence, lost out to a Bulgarian. Go figure. Well, again, I can't understand why you would lose out to a Bulgarian. Because we've got minimum wage legislation, so you can't imagine that the Bulgarian worker would work for any less than it was going to cost you. Language difficulties probably, so why would they get the job? The DED only had one work placement scheme. They need to do more training the unemployed here, not just stick them on typing courses, which seems to be the norm. Here they're stuck in the 70s. Okay. Stu, I know somebody who's been unemployed 4 years in and out, I think, of temporary work. Okay. Work permits need some reform but should be kept in the main. What happens if hundreds of minimum wage workers come sharing flats or houses, they're needing healthcare, etc., etc.? Well, this presumes that if the work permit legislation was relaxed or removed, that we would be facing an influx of people wanting to come to the Isle of Man. I don't know that we would necessarily. Then decide to become career doleys. Also, you really don't know who you're letting in. Well, certainly when I first moved to the island 19 years ago, you couldn't get any benefits at all for 5 years, and you had to have a work permit for 5 years. I don't know if those things have changed, but, somebody that had to sit and wait for 5 years before they were entitled to anything surely isn't going to come over and become a career doley, are they? Unless you have conditions like if you're out of work long-term or commit criminal offences, you have the option of deporting them. John was right. It seems some government jobs are written for somebody they already have in mind, says Jack in Port St Mary. Good.
Talking Heads, brought to you by Magic Carpets, with the only Carndine design showroom on the island.
Don't sit in the slow lane. Join the fast lane right now with Shaw's all-new Superfast Plus broadband. Enjoy more bandwidth, amazing speeds and the best value on the island from just £23.95 per month. So don't be left behind. Get a piece of the high-speed action with Superfast Plus broadband from Shaw. For details, visit our stores in Douglas, Ramsey and Port Erin or click shaw.com.
Love being Shaw.
Terms and conditions apply.